Good. So I'm letting people to settle down. Thank you for coming, and I'll kick it off with a couple of introductory words and then hand over. I have to also let you know that we're still waiting for Pierluigi. He may not be able to join us. We have plenty to talk about when we'll do, and we have François on the screen as well. So thank you for being there. So, what are we going to talk about? I mean, we're not going to go very much outside of what we've been discussing here, but we're going to focus on something that is very, very relevant for the meeting on the MED, which is a European perspective. I mean, we all said, and we keep saying, and it is true, that patient access is what drives us. It drives us because it's our mission. We want to treat patients. We want to bring benefits to unmet medical needs. It was talked about the adoption. There's multiple things that come to it. But really one perspective is patient access will drive value, will drive competitiveness, will feed the system, and actually will value the patients of today and will enable the patients of tomorrow to have access as well. So that's a key important point. But how do we then have that access driven? And in particular in Europe, we're seeing more ATMP products, and we saw Emma Cook actually showing us, and Tim as well. The system is picking up. The field is getting more and more products. But we're lagging on clinical trials. We're lagging on some elements of that competitiveness. And key for that translational work and access work are the design of the clinical trials and the intention of having them assessed not only for regulatory perspectives, but health technology assessment, i.e. the joint clinical assessment report. And we see it as an opportunity, but needs to be an opportunity that is well deployed, that considers the specificities of what we are developing. And we'll talk more about that. And it links to another aspect for Europe, which is the Biotech Act and the intention for us to increase the competitiveness. We are at an intersection point for Europe because of multiple aspects. This patient access discussion, JCA and HTA, the Biotech Act and the political intention to foster biotech in Europe, the geopolitical environment, and which represents a challenge, a wake-up call, and an opportunity for Europe. And so we really need to work on all of those elements. One thing that I'm going to ask you is, do you want the bad news or the good news first? And we heard Emma saying, great news, there's no safety reasons for the withdrawals. That's fantastic. And that's actually a regulatory person statement. As a former regulator, I mean, you always think about safety. And yes, there's no safety issues. And that's great, because we're actually doing a good job and these products are safe and we're getting them well approved. But then the bad news is, there's a series of withdrawals. There's multiple elements that go into the withdrawal, but clearly some, and we know the examples, were withdrawn because of commercial access, pricing, reimbursement issues. That is something that JCA and HTA needs to address, hopefully improve. And how is that being translated into each country access, each country ability to pay or willingness to pay for these products and getting them access to patients? It's a key element for us to discuss as well. So there are several topics, all of them driving on the competitiveness of Europe, all of them driving on making sure that we deliver value to patients with unmet medical needs in Europe. I'm joined by several, not all of them, but several people. Alex Bloom, Chief Technology Officer of AviadoBio. Antonella Cardone, CEO of Cancer Patients Europe. And François Houÿez, Information and Access Therapies Director at EURORDIS. What I'm going to ask is, after my lengthy introduction, and I was already making up for one of the officers that didn't come in, after my lengthy introduction, I will go to each one of you, reintroduce yourselves to the proper way. I mean, I just gave the title. And make any introductory comments on what I've said and your perspective and why you're sitting here at the session. And I'll start with you.
Thank you, Miguel. So great to be here today. So my name's Alex Bloom. I'm the CTO for AviadoBio and also head of regulatory. So AviadoBio is a CNS gene therapy company, an AAV gene therapy company, developing medicines for neurodegenerative disorders. So we have a lead program in clinical trials for an aggressive form of dementia, which is a rare disorder. And then we have a number of programs in our pipeline targeting much more common neurodegenerative disorders such as Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. I have approaching 20 years in biotech, and of that, about 15 years in cell and gene therapy development. So I started my gene therapy journey in 2009, working with a company called Applied Molecular Therapeutics, which is now uniQure, on the Glybera approval, which we finally got approved. And from then to now, I've had the privilege to work on over 50 clinical stage cell and gene therapy programs, 3 of which got approval. And some real challenges with some of those products, one of which we couldn't commercialize at all, and some others where there was a real gap between the high of achieving a marketing authorization in Europe, and then this valley of death to actually getting towards access to patients in a commercial setting. I do see a tremendous opportunity in Europe at the moment, given some of the sort of geopolitical considerations, to really foster innovation and to get access to patients in clinical trials. And with the JCA framework, there is the potential, I believe, to build in the right assessments in clinical development to facilitate commercial access of cell and gene therapies. But I will caveat all my answers today by saying I'm not a general believer that you can legislate your way to innovation. So legislation has to foster innovation, but it won't be the be-all and end-all. That being said, Europe is in a unique situation where it needs to take into account the voices of all of its member states. So it requires centralized legislation to operate effectively. And I think the ATMP regulation is a very good example of that, actually. Nearly 20 years into the ATMP regulation. And it's fostered a number of therapies that have reached the market first in Europe, and a very active committee for advanced therapies at EMA to support companies to MAA.
Antonella.
Yeah. I am Antonella Cardone. I'm the CEO of Cancer Patients Europe. And a quick introduction to Cancer Patients Europe. So Cancer Patients Europe is a pan-European all cancer types patient organization. We currently have 58 members in 26 countries. We work a lot on research, advocacy, and policy. And among our policy dossier, the work that we do on the EU HTA regulation is predominant, is an important priority for us. And this is essentially because the EU HTA regulation came into force in January 2025 for oncology indications and ATMPs. So this is why for us it is very important to be engaged with the regulators and with within the process, because we feel like we are now setting the scene, and we need to make sure that what we do now is done properly, so that also for the others who will follow will be fine. We feel the responsibility, as I said, and the main challenge that we see at the moment is that, yes, the JCA, we welcome the UHT regulation, we welcome the JCA in the spirit in which the JCA, the Joint Clinical Assessment, has been written. But of course, we have several concerns on the implementation. And I must say I'm very sorry that unfortunately the person representing the Italian HTA body, AIFA, could not make it today because it would have been an interesting discussion.
I hear traffic in Rome is terrible.
Yes, yes, so there is still hope, there is still hope. So the problem is that the JCA, I think here we're, at least both of you are now agreeing that the JCA is very much needed. So we do need some sort of homogeneous regulatory system, HTA at European level, because one thing that we often do not consider is that at European level we have 57 member states, but 50 HTA bodies. And of course, each HTA body would like to say its own view and would like to set its own regulation for when it comes to market access. So for us, cancer patient organization, this means delays. This means a delay in access to new treatments. And it means a delay in access, and it means inequalities as well, because there are countries in Europe where a treatment is available the day after EMA approval, and there are countries where it can take up to 3 or 4 years before a treatment is available. And for cancer patients, this means surviving or not to a cancer diagnosis. So we welcome this, the JCA as in its attempt of homogenizing the HTA process at the European level. The fear is that as the JCA is not binding in the member states, it can be seen as, it can become in the end just an additional administrative burden on the countries, on the drug developers, and then for us patients, it will mean an additional delay into access. And I stop here for now, but there is
yeah, we'll dig down a little bit more on some of the elements of JCA and why do we have concerns, but definitely also why we have hopes. François, do you want to do your bit? In other words, introduction and a few sentences, and hopefully we can hear you well.
Thank you, Miguel. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So at EURORDIS, which is a very large network of more than 1,000 patient organizations, or members both in rare cancers and those who benefit already from ATMPs and also future patients who will benefit from ATMPs, we have a strong basis to reflect on how patients can contribute to the European cooperation on HTA. And we have a program to train patient advocates, UCAPA, together with EPF and the University of UMIT in Tyrol, precisely to inform patients and their organizations on the role they can have in the assessment of these ATMPs at the European level. I think we acknowledge that industry is facing difficult times about ATMPs in Europe. The cost of money is higher and higher. Recent withdrawal, as said before, for economic reasons, may have had a negative impact on investors. And yet, we are living in a context where if this HTA cooperation and other elements are not agile and effective in creating a favorable environment for these medicines in Europe, we will be facing competition with China's industry ferociously. China's industry is approaching full speed, launching phase 1 trials for all kinds of ATMPs, and they promise to sell them at 20 or 40% of the price of equivalent products by US or EU pharmaceutical industry. Not to compete directly, but the Chinese strategy will be to offer these treatments to the rest of the world, which represent 80% of the target patient population. So if we don't react with an agile and effective system, we may very soon end up in a situation where patients in Europe, because the products are either not reimbursed or not available, may be tempted to travel to other countries where they can find equivalent treatments, but not evaluated by all regulatory agencies at a lower price. I think that's an important aspect to have in our minds. A second, and I realize I won't be too popular by stating this, but speaking with patient organizations in diseases where they already benefit from advanced therapies, cell and gene therapies, we now avoid more and more using the term cure. These treatments are certainly highly effective, but their efficacy varies. No one is off the hook with these treatments. We need to have realistic expectations when developing these medicines. Otherwise, it may make the conduct of the clinical trial we need more and more complex if we continue to promise a cure when we have very effective products, but that still need to be tested as other medicines. And I stop here for the moment.
Thank you, François. It's interesting, one point that you made, and I think we'll come back to it, which is the position that we have as a field on these products in terms of cure, long-term benefit, highly efficacious products. I mean, clearly they are efficacious. Clearly they go through a translational process and the regulatory process that attests to that. I think it's very important, probably the biggest message out of your point is, beyond us, the cell and gene therapy people, so let's put it this way, we need to make sure that we have the right wording and the right positioning of the value that we're bringing. There may be opportunities of what equates to what we call cure, but we get to it by long-term value, long-term effect, and we need to make sure that we position it in a way that builds up to it. It's kind of, you know, under-promise and over-deliver rather than over-promise and under-deliver kind of thing. But so it's an important point, and it comes down to the JCA, and I would like to drill down a little bit on the JCA perspective, starting by one comment. It was refreshing to see Hema again, because we were together at the inception of the kind of joint European regulatory system. At the time I was also at the European Agency, when all the member states came together, and the same challenges were there in terms of, you know, there was the multi-recognition party, which was kind of trying to bring assessments at different countries, or harmonizing it, and then there was a centralized procedure. And I think from the presentation today, we see a solid system, a regulatory process across Europe, enabling a regulatory decision that is uniform, enabling also a regulatory system that is now ready for the next stage and transformation with pharmaceutical legislation. So it took 30 years. I mean, we cannot wait 30 years for the JCA to go through and the HTA to go the same path, but it's the same principle. So what are some specifics that we are concerned about, and potentially some examples or on some aspects that we are happier about? And probably I'll start with you, Antonella. So
I totally agree with your perspective about EMA, and also with the fact that, to be frank, we cannot wait 20 more years to get the HTA, the JCA work at the European level. Also because we do hope that the JCA is the first step into homogenizing the HTA process, that we will get more homogenic procedures among the member states. I mentioned before that the main risk that we see is the fact that the JCA will become just an additional administrative burden. Because as it is not binding at member state level, that it is not guaranteed, although, I mean, when we speak with the HTA, with the coordination group, they say, oh, well, what would be the purpose for the member states to ask for repetitions of the evidence that has already been submitted throughout the JCA? But then my answer would be, why, if this is so obvious, why the member states did not accept the JCA to be binding to them? So they wanted to maintain this level of freedom. That means that in the back of their mind, there is the possibility to duplicate the work. So this is one thing. Then the other thing is that there won't be an aspect that we are also pushing for a lot is trying to avoid the duplication compared to what has been done by the EMA. So EMA could be seen as a model, or at least as a precedent that can be built on for the JCA process. And unfortunately, we don't see that. So, for instance, in terms of involving the patients and other stakeholders into the process, there is a lot that could be learned from the EMA experience. In terms of methodology, in terms of conflict of interest, for instance. So that is an aspect that we are, again, pushing a lot for. So why the JCA shouldn't and couldn't avoid duplicating the efforts, replicating the mistakes, and just not follow the EMA lead into those aspects.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Antonella. I think you highlight two aspects. One is the translation of the assessment into a local decision, but there's also an element even relating to the regulatory assessment, which is the methodological assessment that leads to the JCA. And what I would say that probably the regulators are more comfortable on some specific aspects of assessing the value with these products, namely limited number of patient products, orphan indications, clearly ethical concerns on clinical trial design for oncology patients. So some of those methodological aspects. And probably, François, if I can go to you and ask your comments. So we've talked about translation to a member state decision, but on itself, the methodological aspects, some good and bad examples, and are we seeing what we all would want is a pragmatical, to the point approach on JCA processes? Are we seeing that? Are we hoping for that? What is your comments, your concerns on that?
It's a bit early to say because at present there is only one JCA in progress with an ATMP, and it's so also confidential in a way that it's difficult. But we'll have the report in a year from now or so, and then we'll see what member states take of the EU report. But this said, I think we hope really that, and we've seen it in other domains, when European experts come together, this is leveraging up the quality of their expertise. Not all agencies in all member states have experts to assess these advanced therapies, so by joining together, they will learn from others, and the scientific discussion will certainly be improved. This said, I think not all ATMPs are equal, and we hope the HTA cooperation will learn to adapt. for most advanced therapies for very rare, very small populations. And again, 85% of rare diseases represent fewer than 500 patients in the EU and often fewer than 200. Here, we hope that the cooperation will learn to move away from asking each member state for different PICOs. At that stage, for this very small population, it doesn't make sense at all to have different PICOs. If there is one that all member states can agree, I think that that would be great to really go to the point and focus on the data. And there won't be different data than the ones assessed by the EMA, by the CHMP. It will be the same data. So I think it's vain to expect indirect analysis with all sorts of comparators for different populations. And that's where we think the EU cooperation will learn not to implement the full machinery of joint clinical assessment, but to realistically and pragmatically assess the data they have. And member states, on a volunteer basis, as part of the cooperation, can even go one step beyond the European report. They could organize an appraisal at the European level and make a recommendation to themselves. We think this product could be recommended for reimbursement for this population, because otherwise they will need to organize the appraisal at the national level, where they will have difficulties to find experts, to find patients. So let's take the best of the EU cooperation for these products for very rare diseases in a pragmatic way. And if you want, I can comment. I have other comments for more prevalent disease, but I think this pragmatic approach is really welcome for ultra-rare diseases.
Maybe if I can go to Alex now and ask a kind of a specific question. JCA assumes, the perspective assumes that we do the development, and we say we because, I mean, we product developers, let's put it this way, do the development with two things in mind, the regulatory, but also the pharmacoeconomic, the HTA assessment. And so could you comment on some of the challenges of being able to do randomized controlled clinical trials, multiple arms, I mean, having to do a generation of evidence that gives us what was acknowledged this morning, which is good safety and good efficacy, but challenge on commercial translation. So could you comment on the need to be pragmatical because of the challenges of designing a clinical development program that meets all of those needs or cannot meet those needs for the right reasons?
Yeah, I think in Europe, the Commission actually did a very good job in providing multiple mechanisms to achieve a marketing authorization. And it allows for non-standard and non-traditional development paths to be taken by sponsors. And it's actually quite different to the United States. So in Europe, you have something called an exceptional circumstances approval, which allows a product to be placed on the market for an ultra-rare disease where maybe a confirmatory clinical trial, a large randomized clinical trial wouldn't be able to be run. There is a conditional marketing authorization, which is similar to an accelerated approval in the US, but it differs because it doesn't rely on surrogate endpoints for approval, which can be advantageous, and it converts to the full approval. So there's actually a lot of flexibility in Europe to allow for non-traditional development paths and to support rare disease, for instance, products getting on the market. Certainly for cell and gene therapies, it encompasses such a broad church of products, from tissue-engineered therapies and replacement organs through to sort of viral vector in vivo therapies that have are more analogous to traditional biologics, but are one and done, so have very different pharmacology. They do require, in nearly all cases, unique clinical development programs. In many cases, control groups are not feasible. Randomization to a placebo is not feasible, and they rely on open label data. They may rely on natural history registries as a comparator group. And that does require, a lot of regulatory flexibility, and certainly in my experience working with the CAT, they do apply that flexibility both in scientific advice and during the MAA process. I think what the concern I have with the JCA is that flexibility in the drug approval process doesn't pull through to the HTA process. And we really need, in the JCA, to understand some of the unique properties of cell and gene therapy products, and that most of these will face non-standard clinical development pathways and non-standard clinical evidence generation.
Do you want to comment on that, François? Because I can see you nod, even though you're on a Zoom.
Yes, certainly. I totally agree. And HTA bodies, I think they need to learn that even when there are thousands of patients and a treatment already available, I understand their need for comparative data via randomized clinical trials, because to them it's the most robust way, the most valid way to generate evidence and to compare. But they also need to understand that it really depends on the condition. When you have a rapidly evolving disease and severe disease, to be randomized to palliative care or standard of care or placebo is not an option for patients. And that's where they need to accept more often external comparators, even if for external comparators, it is really the responsibility of the developer to provide decent external comparators, which are recent and which can actually be compared to the open label trial or single arm trial. But when we have higher knowledge that the product can have a very high treatment effect, I think it's vain to request such randomized clinical trials to be organized. And HTA bodies also, they need to translate into their decision-making the equivalent of conditional marketing authorization by EMA, except that for the moment, they don't know how to do that, or at the national level, when they accept to reimburse a conditional authorization, products authorized via a conditional authorization, the restriction is that it should be at the same price than a competitor product up until the point where additional data will become available. And that may be too restrictive for some products.
I
yes,
also
I would ask you if you want to comment on...
Yes, because I think Alex is rather optimistic towards Europe. And actually, Emer Cooker this morning was very, from the EMA perspective, she was also extremely open to ATMPs. But we do not see that sort of openness at the level of the JCA, at least now. We see some openness, and I must say that maybe it's also because we've been very, very active in advocating for an alternative kind of evidence for ATMPs. We worked with Cancer Patients Europe together with ARM. We developed a statement. We managed to get almost 40 signatories among scientific societies, patient groups. We sent the statement to the European Commission, and the European Commission answered us. So we received a letter, we had some bilateral meetings, and in the end, the European Commission admitted that there is a need to look at alternative kind of evidence for ATMPs in very specific case, but they didn't go deeper into the specificities and or trying to standardize the methodology, which would have been ideal for us to have clear guidelines. Of course, we understand the challenge of standardizing alternative kind of evidence, but we are not there yet. So we are working. There is some sort of openness from the European Commission that we didn't see at the beginning of the process. So this is something that we welcome, but still there is a long way to go.
I'm delighted you say that, because I think Alex was right on saying the regulatory approach, because I think the regulators have done that journey already, right? And we haven't seen that journey in writing from the HTA bodies and perspective. I also agree that you and Paolo and others at ARM actually have really highlighted this perspective, which is we need to understand the specificities. We would have been happier if those specificities were translated into a written intention. I think there is a good intention, potentially a willingness to be pragmatic, but we'll have to see. But you're absolutely right to highlight. And that's the parallel that I was also making on just 30 years to get to a mature system. There will be time to get an HTA, JCA mature system, but that time is at the cost of patients that will have their unmet medical need not addressed timely. Maybe at this point, if the audience has any questions, and there is one question. I don't know if we have microphone or if you can shout, which is probably the same. But you may have to shout a little bit louder.
Yeah.
My name is Miguel from Asteras, and I'm curious to know what are the reasons using Antonella that the DNA, the centralized marketing organization, have worked and have become such a success that now it's the common, let's say, pathway for companies to get a marketing organization. And why do you think it's not the case for drug medical assessment? Do you think it's because we don't have an agency? Do you think it's relies on coordination and collaboration from member states? And we come to, because you made a point about
Did you?
Okay, so I understood the question. So the question, I repeated the question. So the question is, according, in my opinion, why the JCA process is so much challenging in terms of homogenizing the understanding, the process from member states, while at TMA level, they have already overcome the issue of individualized decisions. Well, I think my personal view is that I think that the real problem is a power game, because at member state level, they wanted to maintain power and control on the decision. And so it's essentially a political will to go through the homogenization, and they do on one side. The other aspect is that at member state level they have to decide on also on the pricing, which could be considered a complete separate part from the HTA process, but it is not at the moment. So this is one thing, and then the cultural part. Of course, the agency, but even the agency, in a way, could be overcome if there was a political will, because in any case, at the moment, there is in the EU HTA regulation, there is by law, I mean, it's written that the European Commission will manage the secretariat. There is this EU multi-stakeholder network that is managed by the European Commission. This could play a role of the agency in a way. And probably it was established with that long-term vision. And then there is the coordination group, again, that works towards an open dialogue and a mutual common decision-making process. It may be, I mean, it will take time. We're going into that direction. The problem is that from the patient perspective, we do not have that time.
Yeah, there's a sense of urgency, for sure, from the patient perspective. There's definitely the political context and the fact that budgetary reasons, are the purview of the member states, and it's kind of, and that inter-member state as well as member state decision becomes a challenge. I don't know if you want to comment, Alex or François, on the question.
Maybe just to add that when the EMS started, they started from a relatively white page, blank page, how to assess medicines jointly, whereas the cooperation in HTS started when several member states had already a tradition of assessing technologies, and each was certain to have the best approach for assessing this. So we don't have a joint procedure, we have an aggregation of national agencies who all think they're doing the best job in Europe. And I think what would really help is to lift some uncertainty regarding these advanced therapies. We've been hearing about the lack of certainty about the treatment duration for how many years now? 3, 4, 5, 6? If you add the time of the clinical trials, plus these 3, 4, 5, 6 years, we now have more than 10 years of follow-up for several advanced therapies from the initial development to their use. And we have patient registries, they are mandatory. So instead of asking member states to guess what could be the treatment duration, and when they are discussing market entry agreements, working on different scenarios with a 3% decline rate of efficacy per year, or 5 or 7, why don't we have data on the average treatment duration by type of advanced therapies, depending on which vector are used or which are the target organs? I think that it could be an excellent work to pull all the data there is to at least provide actual data on average treatment effects. Otherwise, we will continue discussing but we don't know if these treatments can work for 2 years, 3 years, and that is blocking national decisions to be made. When this evidence exists, I think it should be made more public. We would really benefit from lifting at least some uncertainty, even if you cannot predict from this data the treatment duration of the next to come advanced therapies. I think we need to understand better the impact of the already used technologies in terms of at least treatment duration, but also effectiveness. There are excellent registries, Descartes registry in France with almost 5,000 patients who receive CAR T cells since 2019 for 10 different indications. More Europa has also started to assess real-world data with advanced therapies precisely to try to respond to these questions. We need that background information to inform HTA.
I agree that in a way real-world evidence comes into it. Is there any other question from the audience? Do you want to make any comments on this real-world evidence integration into a clinical development plan and some perspectives?
Yeah, and there are many.
Giving us enough time for us to.
There are multiple mechanisms to allow for real-world evidence and sort of non-standard evidence pools to be used to support clinical development and also pricing and reimbursement. I think the challenge, as you've heard today, is that when you have a situation where each member state will look at the same evidence and assess it differently, we will always face these challenges. So the thing that works so well with drug regulation in Europe, the centralized procedure is that once a recommendation has been made and it's ratified by the Commission, the product can be placed on the market across all member states, right? Whereas when you have a situation where you have each country making individual assessments on the same data and coming to different conclusions, we will always have that challenge.
Thanks, Alex. We're getting to the end, and there were two main topics on the discussion today. One is obviously patient access, JCA, health technology assessment, and how that is impacting the competitiveness of Europe linking to the Biotech Act. So could I ask each one of you to make a comment on that perspective in terms of take-home message for the audience JCA, HTA, Competitiveness Europe, and future directions. Maybe I'll start with you.
For me, is that the sense of urgency needs to get through. We cannot wait, and we cannot wait for several reasons, including the risky geopolitical situation that we are in now. So we need to speed up the access to ATMPs, and we need to develop and implement an ecosystem that helps rather than hinder the uptake of ATMPs and innovative treatments for cancer patients.
François?
I think with the HTA cooperation, we will have quite an agreement on the clinical benefit of these technologies. Where the obstacle will remain is the affordability and the economic aspects at the national level. And there is a pressure outside of the pharmaceutical sector because these technologies can be made by some hospitals. So we have the hospital exemptions. You also have some charities developing technologies and proposing crowdfunding schemes to invest in the research, but also exploring the possibility to use one vector, several modifying genes to reduce the manufacturing cost. Plus, as time passes, many royalties that need to be paid for the invention that were needed to bring these products in development and on the market. Now these inventions are approaching their 20 years and will become public domain, which could also reduce the cost of the technologies. There are different factors, I think, which will influence the affordability discussion at the national level. And we hope that the HTA cooperation will also, on a voluntary basis, open a dialogue on these economic aspects and maybe at least agree on which methods are best fit to assess the economic value of these products.
Thank you, François.
Yeah, I think we need all stakeholders to show maximum flexibility to drive innovation and ultimately to have timely access to therapies for patients.
Thank you all. Let's be competitive. Let's be focused on delivering value to patients and making sure they get access to treatment. So thank you very much to the audience. Thank you very much to the panelists, and enjoy lunch.